Hello, Anita.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, nice to see you again. I've seen you several times now.
I know, thank
So
you.
anyway, we'll give you 5 minutes presentation, and then we usually send out this as a video to our membership and to post it on the various venues. So you'll have a much broader exposure than just our group today. So Anita, you're running for Community College Board. Could you give
Yes.
us a total of 5 minute presentation and questions, please?
Okay. Well, I hope to be brief in the presentation. I'm Anita Martinez. I'm from a family poor in money, but rich in love and family connections. My family comes from northern New Mexico. My father was especially proud of his indigenous roots, Comanche and Navajo. Until I was 12, we lived in rural Nebraska. Our house had 2 rooms, a small kitchen and a common room for everyday living, and then sleeping at night. There was no indoor plumbing. We moved to California when my father was forced to retire due to severe arthritis. That opened up higher education for me because community colleges were free in California. I studied at San Joaquin Delta College, completing my associate's degree while working part-time. I transferred to SF State, where I found myself immersed in conversations about systemic racism. I was often the only student of color in any of my classes. I was a history major hoping to research the enslavement of Native peoples in the Southwest, but changed my major when my history professors would not honor the student strike. My grassroots activism started as a student marcher in the San Francisco State Strike, led by the Black Students Union in coalition with other student groups to establish the School of Ethnic Studies and EOP. We didn't win all our demands, but ethnic studies is alive and growing and now in the public schools. My commitment developed into a 40-year career with the same goals: improve student access in higher education, especially for Black and Brown students. In 2019, I was invited to speak at the City College Ethnic Studies Teach It. I told the students that as a former student and a community college teacher and administrator, I was passing the baton on to them in the struggle for social justice. As I finished speaking, I realized that I could and should go one more lap as a member of City College Board of Trustees. My 28 years of City College experience would help inform board decisions. I'm running with the support of faculty, students, and retirees who are just as concerned as I am with the problems at City College. The budget's a mess, the registration is dysfunctional, and students are turning away, and so is enrollment. Enrollment is dropping. Too many classes have been canceled, and outcomes for Black and Brown students need to be improved. My campaign is not about me. It's about using what I know to stop the downsizing of City College. It's about keeping City College a community college, a college of and for the community. And that's why I'm speaking to you today, because I'm hoping for endorsement and support. Thank you.
Okay. Your long experience with City College in so many roles, you must have seen the budget and finance mismanagement of the college for many, many years. So, and it had problems with chancellors that have had very short tenure, budget and finance people who have not even been able to tell if there was a deficit. So what do you think has been the problem with this financial uh, issues with the college?
Well, you've identified a lot of them. The primary reason I'm running is because the next board will select a permanent chancellor, and that permanent chancellor has the responsibility for establishing a strong administration. There has not been a chief financial officer at City College for probably the last 3 or 4 years, and the turnover in the budget office is awful. So when I'm elected, my primary concern would be in getting a really good chancellor appointed to the board. And right now, they're looking for a CFO, a chief financial officer. I had been bugging and bugging and bugging the board for years that that's what they needed. When they hired this new interim chancellor, he recommended on July 30th reorganization of the top administration, and one of his recommendations was for a CFO, and I was so happy to see that. They're searching for that person right now. We need that person desperately to help straighten things out.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Okay, I'll ask another one. The college has had dropping enrollment.
Yes.
and curriculum has been cut. It seems to be in a self-induced spiral downward. What do you think the remedy is?
The remedy is to have a really good chief instructional officer. I was chief instructional officer at City College for 1 year. And during that time, I not only was in charge of instruction, but I had to pull the two divisions together into a flatter administrative chart. But I also, from that, I knew a lot about instruction. The second place that I've had experience is at College of Marin. I was the person in charge of instruction and in charge of student services. And I've been surprised that so many classes have been cut, because that's the last thing you want to cut. The revenue comes to City College primarily from enrollment. We aren't like other colleges that have large endowments or that have large fundraisers. We have to depend on enrollment. So the last thing I would have done as a board member is cut. And I've also been contacting the board and saying to them, since last November, talking with them one-on-one, saying you really need a new chancellor, you really need a new chief fiscal officer, and you need a new person in charge of instruction. The department chairs should have been consulted when classes were cut, because department chairs understand the curriculum, they know the classes, they know the enrollment patterns, they know how the curriculum holds together, and they can make much better decisions than the one individual who actually did all the cutting. The cutting was severe.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Anita.
Thank you.
It. And thank you for all your years of service.
Anytime. And if anybody wishes to reach me, I'm available for further questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank
all
you.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, Karen, who would you suggest we go to next?
I think Marie Herobiel is here. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing her name.
Okay, Marie.
Hi, you actually did a great job.
Hello, Marie.
Hello.
Marie is also running for the Community College Board, so we'll have 5 minutes total of your time.
Great, thank you. Should I go ahead and get started?
Yes, please.
Wonderful. Well, I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And I am actually honored to follow Anita. I think she's really stellar and would be a wonderful addition, frankly, to the board. And I think the two of us together would be great additions, and I'll explain why in a second. A little bit of background about me. I am an 8th generation San Franciscan. I love this city. I've been involved in our community since the age of 5 as a volunteer, fundraiser, and leader. I grew up in the Richmond district. I left town to attend college at Georgetown and then law school at the University of Pennsylvania. I worked for a judge in Los Angeles and then returned to my beloved hometown, San Francisco. And I practiced for many years as an attorney and then sort of morphed into an entrepreneur. I have started a mental health technology company with my fiance, and we live here in San Francisco with our 2 children. San Francisco Community College is at a crossroads, and I believe we have a choice of 2 paths. The road CCSF is currently traveling is one of 3 years of financial mismanagement, instability, and an 18% decline in enrollment. With the perspective of 22 years of leadership in education and other complex institutions, including 6 years on the Georgetown Board of Regents, I see a second, healthier path. With strong experience guidance, CCSF can regain financial stability, reestablish its reputation, and endure as an important educational and economic engine that serves an abundantly diverse cross-section of our community. My experience with governance and fundraising at academic institutions, including 2 of the top universities in the world, is exactly what is needed to successfully overcome the intense and worsening challenges facing CCSF. CCSF is in danger of closing or being taken over by the state, creating a crisis in San Francisco. CCSF must be saved, but electing the same type of candidates, politicians beholden to stakeholders over and over, will yield the same unacceptable outcomes. I hope you will choose to vote for me because I'm completely independent. I've declined all offers of consideration for endorsement by stakeholders, which I now realize might have been a little bit naive, but this is my first time running for anything, so I'm learning. and I've done that so that I could focus exclusively on doing what is right to save CCSF. I will not be beholden to special interest groups if elected to serve as a trustee. I'm the only candidate with board experience at a top university where I piloted a revolutionary curriculum innovation. I'm the only candidate who has raised over $40 million for educational and other causes, and I will bring creative funding, ideas, and opportunities to CCSF. And finally, I'm the only candidate who has served on the Audit and Finance Committee of a fiscally fit $150 million quasi-government organization. Again, I'm an 8th generation San Franciscan who's passionate about the transformative power of education, and I believe CCSF is a gem that should be preserved. I will be your independent and experienced voice on the board if you choose to vote for me. Thank you so much.
What has City College's budget sources been, and why is it not sustainable?
Well, the budget sources are basically taxpayer funded, both city and state. And there's a state funding formula that has changed, and CCSF has not caught up with the funding formula as of yet. So I think there's definitely some work to be done there. I do know that there are some people who want to fight the state on that funding formula. And that's, perhaps a path that some people want to take. I think the funding formula, however, is in line with the community college organization, with the sort of thinking around community colleges at the state level. They are interested in really promoting certain types of educational experience for students. And we want that to be broader. So what we need to do is look at what the state will support, and we need to gear classes towards that. But then we also need to look at what the community wants and needs. The state supported is really more credit oriented. So obviously that's really important for a lot of our students in order to get a foothold in higher education in an affordable way. On the other hand, we do also have community, and we have a lot of interests and goals that are beyond just creating a credit oriented college. So when we parse those out, I think it becomes a lot more obvious what we need to do. We need to gear certain classes that will allow us to obtain as much funding as possible from the state sources and from that funding formula. But then we also need to have more creative sources that will allow us to fund what are more community-oriented classes. And that's one area that I think is really ripe for advancement in the next several years, is to really go out and create partnerships with the community and with businesses in the Bay Area to allow us to provide more with either donated dollars or more in-kind types of donations resulting from those partnerships.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Marie. Appreciate it. It was a very good presentation.
Oh, thank you so much. Am I out of time?
Yep.
Great.
Okay,
So
thank
nice
you.
to meet you. Thank you
All right.
so much.
All right.
Howard, Jenny Lamb is here, so I thought we could
Okay.
have her go
Yes,
next.
please. Okay. Jenny Lamb is on the Board of Education, and she's running for re-election. Jenny?
Hi, Howard, and
Hi.
hi to the District 3 Democratic Club. Thank you so much for having me this evening. It's been about 1 year since I got a chance to speak with the club. And again, I'm Jenny Lamb. I currently serve on the school board. I am running for re-election because I believe in a child's right to a quality education and a safe learning environment. And when we have strong public schools, we will have greater educational opportunities for our children. And no more than now during the pandemic, just how clear it is about we must be able to serve our children and our families with the best possible educational opportunities. I want to be able to continue the important systemic work that I've had the honor to do from chairing the Finance and Budgeting Committee and prioritizing keeping funding at our school sites to passing groundbreaking policies and resolutions while on the school board. And I've been at the center of the school district's COVID response. We have much more to learn and improve and do, but we're providing that city and principal leadership, and now working towards an improved plan going forward, again, as we face the long road ahead of the pandemic and the recovery. Some of the policies that I've co-authored and sponsored include the Black Lives Matter and the elimination of Black police officers on school campuses, and ensuring that our students are safer at their school sites, to increase mental health services where young people are designing and leading those programs, to approving a budget that keeps, as I mentioned earlier, the resources at school sites, so those programs and services are reaching the students directly, and that we as a district are fulfilling our commitment to our educators and staff. A little bit about me. I started my career as a young organizer, community organizer in San Francisco, Chinatown, working in early care and education nonprofit organization, and really that experience paved the way for me spending 20 years working in community, working in immigrant rights to civil rights, learning and advocating, building social movements. And that's where I also got to lead in executive positions of nonprofit organizations, both in Oakland and working in public schools there with students and families, to serving nearly 7 years at Chinese for Affirmative Action in Chinatown. And I'm also a product of public schools, including the first in my family to go to college. I'm a daughter of immigrants and English learner, and a longtime San Francisco resident. I've now lived here for 22 years. I'm a resident of Diamond Heights, and I have 2 children attending public schools. I now have one child in high school at Abraham Lincoln High, and a middle schooler at Roosevelt. And I, will continue to fight for equity and justice for our students, and my priorities continue to be grounded in the COVID recovery for the school district, ensuring continuity of distance learning, and then we need to be able to continue, addressing and tackling the opportunity achievement gap. And then again, with the student health and safety and wellness at the center. And then again, for fiscal budgeting is going to be so critical for both San Francisco Unified as well as public school districts across the state, as well as the country. So I hope that to get your support and welcome questions.
Okay. Well, schools are not going to open as normal, obviously. So the at-home learning and the digital divide needs to be addressed. What do you see as needed?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. First as soon as we made the important decision to close our schools because of shelter in place, the school district within a week's time, launched our food distribution sites. I want to acknowledge, with Supervisor Peskin and his team worked really worked really hard as well with the school district when it was acknowledged that there were not full food centers, including in Chinatown. And so with the school board members, as well with community, really pushing to ensuring that the school district was serving our students citywide when it came to emergency response like food, because food insecurity, as we know, is so critical when we think about learning and again, a learning environment. So since the spring, the school district now has served over 2.5 million meals. And then related to the digital divide, I just want to be able to lay that context. Similarly, was a top priority, because we know that in order to have any type of learning at home and distance learning, we have to address that digital divide. And so since the spring, the district now has distributed over 33,000 Chromebooks and devices and over 10,000 hotspots. Now, we're not done. We're not done in addressing that digital divide, and that's why it's been so important to be able to partner with the city, partnering with the Fiber to Housing Project, where I know that one of the public housing sites in North Beach was also being able to have wired to broadband access, which is really critical. I know that there are also going to be additional resources in working with SRO buildings as well in Chinatown, and being able to get our students and our most vulnerable families connected to the internet. So that work continues. It's really critical. And another part of the digital divide is also about working with our students and families to be able to fully, engage and be connected to the distance learning. And we, again, understand and know as a district that we have improvements to make, particularly how we're supporting our parents and our immigrant families or limited English families to be able to learn how to navigate not only the digital devices themselves, but really the how do you co-educate with your children, especially the youngest learners.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jenny, and keep up the good work on these challenging times.
Thank you,
All
Harder.
right.
Really appreciate it. And thank you to
All
the
right.
team, to the club.
Okay.
Take good
Thank you very
care.
much. All right, good evening. Okay, Karen, do we have our next speaker yet?
Yes, Chanel Williams is here.
Okay, Chanel Williams is the current member of the Community College Board, and she's running for re-election. Chanel?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Howard, and good
Hi.
evening, D3 Dems. I'm Chanel Williams. I'm currently president of the Board of Trustees at City College. I was elected to the board in 2016, and prior to being elected, I was one of the lead organizers for the Save City College Coalition during the accreditation crisis. In addition to serving on the board, I worked during the day for UCSF, the California Preterm Birth Initiative, where we focus on reducing racial disparities in pregnancy and birth for Black and Brown and API women in San Francisco, Oakland, and Fresno. I'm a native San Franciscan. I was raised in the West Rendition, Fillmore. I'm a product of all public schools. I went through SFUSD and City College. My father was a construction laborer, and my mom was in nursing. And so I come from a very working class background, and City College was really my only option to pursue higher education. During some rough times in my family, I spent time in the foster care system, and I went right into City College after transitioning out at the age of 18, and then went back into the workforce, spent a long time there, and then came back to retrain. And so I've been an organizer and an advocate in the Bay Area for now 20 years. I started off very young with organizations like the Youth Commission, with Youth Leadership Institute, and a number of others. And if I'm reelected to the board, I really want to focus on serving our students, particularly during this pandemic and the crisis that we're seeing all across our country. Our students are very uncertain right now. They need as much support as possible. So that's my number one priority if reelected, is really serving our students well and making sure they get what they need to be able to be in this new normal of all online learning. My second priority is fiscal stability. As you've seen in the news, and folks who are close to City College know very well, we've had a rough few years from our accreditation crisis. We've lost significant enrollment. We've lost thousands of students, and our enrollment really is our baseline funding for college. We've seen a 30% reduction in revenue, and we've tried to, over time, reduce expenditures in a thoughtful way. And now with the hold harmless funding that we received from the state exiting out, we're gonna have to make some tough decisions around the budget. And so really having board members committed to making those decisions for the long-term stability of the college is, my priority. And so fiscal stability. Also, last but not least, is equity, diversity, and inclusion. I know, again, what we're seeing all across our country, the divides that we're seeing in our country, it's critical now that we continue to educate all of our constituents at the college on the importance of equity, the importance of diversity and inclusion. And so I really want to do that deep work with our faculty, with our staff, with our administrators, to really make sure that City College is a safe place for all students, whether you're Black, Latinx, or Asian Pacific Islander. You can come to City College and get a great education. So I'm ready to take on those challenges. And I've spent about 8 years now advocating for City College. This will be my second term on the board, and that will bring me to about 12 years of fighting for this college, because I believe in what City College does for our community. Since serving on the board, we've brought in significant amount of revenue. We created Free City College, which brought in a significant millions of dollars to the college for free education for all San Franciscans. We want to expand that to workers. We've been able to get an $845 million bond the largest bond in the history of City College passed, which will redesign and rehabilitate all of our campuses, which is really exciting. And we've been working really hard during this COVID-19 pandemic to make sure that we're being safe. We're supporting our students, supporting our faculty and our administration. I've also, just a couple other points on what we've done, gone to the state to renegotiate the debt that we have. There's a $24 million debt that exists with the state at this time. We were able to restructure that debt at a cost savings to City College. That's part of the advocacy that I've engaged in. And we've gone to the federal level. We've advocated for the CARES Act. We've talked to all of our federal representatives, all of our state representatives to get as much support and funding for the college. And at the local level, I know that folks have heard about the Workforce Education Recovery Fund, which we're still looking into getting some funding for our workforce development training programs. So with all that to say, I want to finish what I started, and I'll open it up for questions.
Okay. City College has closed the Fort Mason Arts Center, Civic Center. It has multiple campuses, the main campus, Chinatown, Mission, downtown. What do you envision as the infrastructure, and how do you organize all those campuses in a more efficient way?
Thank you for that, Howard. So Fort Mason and the airport campus and Southeast campus are campus that we lease. We do not own those campuses. We've been leasing them for a significant amount of years. The other campuses we own. And so I think that we need to, fully utilize the properties that we own, which is really great that we own so much great real estate in San Francisco, and really being able to serve the communities, adjacent to those campuses with the programs and classes that they want. We're going to be engaging in listening sessions next month to talk to the community about what types of programming really will work for them, whether that's Chinatown, downtown, Ocean campus, all of our campuses. We want to hear from the community, that local community by those campuses, what would really work for them, where we can have good enrollment at those campuses. And so during the COVID-19 pandemic, with the Fort Mason decision, we were not getting any rent relief. And we also were being told that we have to do millions of upgrades to the Fort Mason site, and we don't own that site. And so for us, it was a fiscally smart decision to say, hey, we're in COVID, the building's sitting empty. Where could we relocate and offer these classes? And so we want to make those types of decisions, during this time, because we don't want to throw away any funding that we have that could be utilized for other programs, other campuses and centers.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Chanel. Appreciate your great presentation.
Thank you.
Best of luck. Okay, thank you. Okay, Karen, do we have our next speaker?
Yes, Tom Temprano.
Okay, Tom. Tom Temprano is also a current member of the Community College Board, and he's running for re-election. Tom.
Well, thank you, Howard, and thank you, Karen. It's good to be here. I am Tom Temprano. I am proud to be President Williams' VP. I am the Vice President of the City College Board currently. I attended community college classes back when I was in high school and had to drop out to deal with an illness. The availability of those classes and the close relationship that my school district had with my community college district helped me to get back on track, graduate, move to San Francisco to go to SF State, and the rest is history. So I was elected to the City College Board in 2016. I had also, as President Williams was a part of the Save City College Coalition when I was president of the Harvey Milk LGBTQ Democratic Club. We were the first LGBTQ organization to sign on to the Save City College Coalition. And I decided to keep up the fight, and Chanel and I were both elected in 2016. We've obviously faced some serious challenges during that time. As President Williams noted, most significantly, a series of really impactful funding cuts at the state level, which have led to some challenging decisions over these last 4 years. But I know that this board and I am committed to making sure that City College stays whole, stays in San Francisco, that we don't risk another accreditation crisis, and that we are here for students not only today, but for decades to come. We've actually done some really great stuff over the last 4 years that I'm enjoying running for reelection and getting to talk with folks about. Chanel mentioned these, but we've actually secured over $1 billion in new revenue for City College over these last 4 years. We negotiated a 10-year, $200 million MOU with the city to fully fund the Free City College program and to extend the promise of free public higher education to all San Franciscans for a full decade. In March, which feels like it was 3 years ago, but it was really just March, we passed Proposition A, which brings in 845 million, a lot more than 145 million dollars to help us rebuild a number of our centers, including Ocean, Evans, our Tenderloin Center, and looking forward, this board has been pushing those projects forward quickly because we know that having world-class facilities is key to keeping our world-class faculty and our world-class students in our school. We had our accreditation reaffirmed for 7 years, which is a tremendous victory, which we should not lose sight of. We were able to negotiate new contracts that raised the salaries of our faculty, our classified staff, and our building and construction trades workers by double digits. And a couple initiatives that I'm particularly proud of and championed were the creation of the City Dream Center. It's an undocumented student resource center that I worked with our AB 540 task force on to secure $700,000 to create a wraparound service center for undocumented students that provide student support services, legal resources for them and their families. And I think is a model that we need to expand on for other groups of students and student resource centers on campus. As a gay man, I also was horrified when I joined the board and heard stories from students and staff, particularly trans and gender nonconforming students and staff who faced transphobic bullying, who heard hate speech in the classroom, who were harassed when they used a restroom of their choosing, things that we don't think happen in places like San Francisco and at City College and shouldn't, but sadly do. So we were able to pass a gender diversity policy at the board this past December that prohibits those sort of abuses of our faculty and staff and creates pathways to change some of our systems to make sure they aren't happening again. I also had been working and have been working closely with Supervisor Gordon Marr on dedicated funding from the city to fund a lot of our workforce education programs, our older adults programs, our non-credit ESL programs, all that have been underfunded now by the state. We were sideswiped by COVID a bit, as was everyone and everything, but I'm confident that over the next couple of years, we'll be able to get some strong dedicated city funding for City College. I'll wrap up so we can have questions, but I do think that with COVID-19, City College's challenges, including those state funding cuts, have become all the more dire at the time that San Franciscans need us the most. Community college enrollment is counter-cyclical. The economy is good. People don't come back to community college. The economy tanks, and we have had an unprecedentedly quick and deep economic collapse in this country. And we know that there are tens of thousands of San Franciscans that are out of work and are going to need and depend on City College. So we're going to need people that actually know how to fight for funding for this college. I know how to fight for that funding. I've done it for the last 4 years, and I hope to continue to lead this college and fight for it and our students for 4 more years.
Key factor, I think, has been the lack of a really good chancellor and a capable financial department. How are you going to attract better talent to lead?
Sure. So when I first joined the board, I believe that our previous chancellor at that point was our 5th chancellor in 6 years at City College. And it's very difficult to attract and retain new quality leadership with that level of administrative turnover. We did, under President Williams and my leadership, made the decision to move on from our previous chancellor and have actually put in place a process that will stabilize the leadership at the college. Instead of rushing out and trying to bring in somebody new, we wanted to take the time to bring in a really experienced interim chancellor who could help us with an administrative reorganization, could help us hire up, and we actually already are hiring up in our finance office. We have multiple positions that are being interviewed for now. And the chancellor we hired, Dr. Verdian, we actually brought him out of retirement He has, this is his third stop at a community college that is coming out of accreditation issues, facing budget issues, and he has a real track record of bringing stability to institutions like ours, and already has us, I believe, on the right track. So we now have him, and we will have an opportunity next year to bring in hopefully a new permanent chancellor. And for me, it is really important that we bring in an experienced chancellor, a chancellor who has strong budget and fiscal background, a chancellor who has strong relationships with the state, because that will be increasingly important again as we deal with these COVID budget impacts, but also a chancellor that has real vision. I think because of the turnover at the top that certainly predated my time on the board, we haven't had a chancellor who's been able to really execute a long-term vision for the college. And I want our next chancellor at City College to certainly be the last chancellor that I have to hire, and be a chancellor that will be with the college, for a decade, and really lead us into this new post-COVID world.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Tom, and best of luck.
Thanks, Howard.
Okay.
Thank you. Take care.
Good evening. Okay. Karen, do we have our next speaker?
Yes. So we have Alaya Chisti. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that. I apologize.
All right. Okay. Alaya Christie is another candidate for the Community College Board.
Hi, thank you so
Hi.
much for having me. My name is Alia Chisti, and I am running for City College Board. I was born and raised in San Francisco. I grew up in District 11. And at an early age in my life, I realized how education can transform lives. And so I have been on this journey to improve our educational systems. I have pursued a master's in education policy from Columbia University. I am a Fulbright scholar where I was an ESL teacher in North Macedonia. And I have also served as a legislative aide where I drafted legislation to ban the box on private college applications, making San Francisco the first city in the nation to do so. And so currently, there we go. Sorry.
Okay.
Currently, I am overseeing the Free City College program at the Department of Children, Youth, and their Families, where I conduct fiscal and programmatic oversight for this really critical program. And one of the things that I have learned is that we need to do more for our students. We need to do more for our community college students that are hanging on by a thread for their goals to reach educational opportunities. And so I am running because I believe City College of San Francisco is the people's college. It transforms lives. And so if elected, I will fight for a permanent emergency grant program for students, invest in student support services, expand Free City, and most importantly, work on workforce development opportunities given the current situation and the pandemic. I think the college needs greater transparency in decision making, and I will foster that. And I think, it's going to be a tough road ahead, but we need people that have experience in education. I'm proud to be endorsed by AFT 2121, Congressman Ro Khanna, UESF, and I would be proud to have your endorsement as well. Thank you.
The big financial crises of City College has preceded even COVID-19. So
Yep.
what do you think have been the major issues that need to be resolved today?
Absolutely. So that's a culmination of a few things that's been building up. We have seen a steady decline in enrollment at the college, and so we need the enrollment to hit 32,000 FTES so that we could have baseline funding. The state has shifted to a performance-based funding model, even though there's mixed research whether that actually accomplishes the outcome of improving the goals based on the model, performance-based funding model. So I think that we need to increase revenue for the college. We need to advocate at the local level, the state level, and we need to also create a stronger checks and balances within the institution so that can be making sure there's a controller, a budget analyst, so that we're making decisions with projections and scenario analysis happening.
With the COVID-19 and many people unemployed and underemployed, City College could play a larger role in retraining or re-education. What are your plans for that?
Absolutely. I think that City College is going to play a very integral role in that. And so some of the things that I would love to see and I will advocate for is a stronger partnership with the public sector, specifically the city and county of San Francisco, looking at how we can build pipelines, job pipelines with the city, I think is going to be very important. I also think that we need to be working with different entities to create these clear pipelines for our community college students. And simultaneously, for the students that are enrolled, we need to make sure they're successful in their classes so that they can make it to the next point of getting their jobs. So making sure we have Wi-Fi hotspots, we have laptops for them, and they have the support services they need.
Would the city college be able to open in-class learning, or do you think it will be more of a digital and technological at home?
Yeah, I haven't seen, what I've seen from what I've heard from what other community colleges are doing, they are online for spring 2021. So I think that the online instruction will continue. So I think that, but students there was actually a Washington Post article that came out about how online instruction is having a negative impact on low income and students of color, particularly at community colleges. And so we need to figure out how to get these students the support services, mental health resources, and we're supporting our teachers as well through this very difficult time as we're going to be doing online instruction.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Aaliyah.
Thank you so much.
Best of luck to you.
Thank
All right.
you, I appreciate it.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, do we have Proposition D available? Kaori?
Hi, yeah.
Yes, hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Okay,
Thank you for having me.
Proposition D is a sheriff's department oversight measure.
Yep. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me today to consider yes on Proposition D. So again, this is the sheriff oversight measure. The sheriff's department has been plagued with rampant misconduct and discrimination for years, from gladiator fights to spending over $21 million annually in overtime, to disproportionate use of force against patients of color in our hospitals and even in custody deaths. It's really high time that we improved oversight into our sheriff's department here in San Francisco. So what having an oversight board and an independent inspector general would do would be to provide much more public transparency and accountability when investigating any incidents of misconduct or mistreatment and abuse. And this is, like, more specifically, the charter amendment would create an oversight board to, 1, appoint an inspector general to evaluate the work of the sheriff's department, 2, develop a use of force policy and comprehensive review process for all use of force and critical incidents, 3, investigate the death of any individual in the custody of the department, 4, review and investigate complaints of non-criminal misconduct by employees, contractors of the department, as well as in custody deaths, and 5, develop policy recommendations. This measure was voted onto the ballot and is supported unanimously by the entire Board of Supervisors, and it's already been endorsed by a diverse coalition of labor and community organizations. So right now that includes the SF Labor Council, the United Educators of San Francisco, Local 21, San Francisco Rising Action, No New Jail SF. It's also been endorsed by elected officials and bodies, including the Democratic Party, District Attorney Chesa Boudin, our public defender, State Senator Scott Wiener, and Assemblymember David Chu. So I'll just wrap up by saying that in California and nationwide, we're seeing a need for increased sheriff and law enforcement oversight. And just a few weeks ago, Senator Nancy Skitter's bill to authorize a similar oversight board statewide in every county successfully passed the legislature. This is the moment, I think, to join the broader movement for justice reform and the decades of discrimination and treatment that was, rampant within our local sheriff's department. And it's long overdue that people in custody and staff really be treated humanely and not have to fear being assaulted or silenced by the deputies. So I hope that you consider supporting this measure, and thank you for your consideration.
Well, some people argue that the police departments have oversight boards and they haven't worked very well. So how would the sheriff's oversight board have better results?
Yeah, so are you referring to the DP, like the Department of Police
Well,
Accountability?
police, whatever the police review board is, there is a
Yeah.
board there.
Right. So currently the DPA has had a contract with the Sheriff's Department for 2 years now, and they actually just expanded it. But they have completed they have like 38 outstanding recommendations from the Obama administration to reduce like racist practices. They've completed about 5, I believe, of like the 38 outstanding for their own police department. So they have not completed even what was outlined for their current responsibilities. So it's hard to imagine that they would have any capacity to do so for an entire new entity like the Sheriff's Department, even though that's what they've been tasked with. And on top of that, this is a whole new independent board. Yes.
Who would appoint members of this Sheriff's Oversight Committee?
I might be getting the exact number wrong, but there are 4, I believe 4 members appointed by the Board of Supervisors, 3 members by the mayor, and then 1 member who has experience in labor, like unions.
Okay. So currently the elected sheriff, I believe, does not support this measure. Is that correct?
That is correct.
What is his argument against the measure?
His argument is that the body would be duplicative. It does cost like just under $3 million. And so his argument is that during, the financial deficit right now, it's unnecessary and it's not something to be investing money in. And my counter argument to that would be that his department, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, cost $21 million just in overtime, and their budget was $261 million. So this would be a drop in the bucket.
So the Sheriff's Department is saying that they have their own internal existing review.
Yes.
But it's not independent. It's his own staff or own leadership reviews the cases. So
well, yeah.
So do other existing sheriff's departments around the country have such a review board?
Yeah, this measure was actually, so this was put on originally by Supervisor Shimon Walton, and he had consulted with a bunch of experts and law enforcement from across the state and country. Most notably, Los Angeles implemented something similar with Measure R, I believe, in March of 2020, and it's been working very well. So,
okay, all right, great. Thank you very much, Carol.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right,
Take
thank
care.
you. All right, have a good evening.
Bye, you too.
Okay, and finally, toward one of our finales. So is Supervisor Peskin available yet?
I am here, Howard.
Hey, hi, Aaron. How are you?
I'm okay.
So we're going to give you 20 to 25 minutes and to present all the city ballot measures and state measures, and some of the state measures. I understand you may have others present those, or yourself if you would like.
Sure. So thank you, Howard.
And to the audience, I think to make it more interesting, if you have a really pertinent question or comment on each measure, feel free to ask the question or make a comment, but try to make it germane. But you'll also have a chance at the end of all the presentations to ask the questions. Aaron, please proceed.
Thank you, Howard.
Last proposition.
I'm sorry, Ms. Burke?
I was trying to find out what the woman was here for the last proposition.
That was for D as in David.
Prop D.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So let me just start out by saying, and I'd like to stay as long as possible, but I've got 36 minutes before I've got to be in another meeting. But Lee Hepner, my staff, is here who can fill in after I leave and can do the state propositions. On the local level, there are 13 different measures. And before I go into them, you just heard of one, Prop D, so I have 12 left. But before we do that, I just want to give you what gets on the ballot and why does it get on the ballot, quick synopsis, which are certain things must go on the ballot. For instance, only the voters can approve a tax measure. Only the voters can approve a charter amendment, and only the voters can referend things. There are many other things that can, and in my mind, should be done by the elected legislators and the chief executive, but occasionally, for reasons of politics, end up on the ballot. So I just wanted to give you that because I will mention that as to each and every single one of these measures. Let me start with Proposition A, which was long contemplated as a parks bond, but in the COVID-19 period has changed and morphed to be really a parks, mental health, and economic recovery bond. It would allow the as much as $487.5 million to first acquire and improve facilities to for folks who are experiencing mental health challenges, and that is about and homelessness, and that is about 207 million of the 487.5 million. Additionally, $239 million for a host of different parks and open space and recreation projects, including the largest particular item, which is $54 million for the renovation, long-needed renovation, in my opinion, of Portsmouth Square. And in addition, $41.5 million for street repaving, curb ramps, plazas, and the like. It was put on unanimously by the Board of Supervisors. It is a tax. By the way, it was also endorsed by the mayor, so we had consensus all around. It is a tax, so it requires a vote of the people in the amount of 2/3 plus 1 vote. And I commend it to all of you. It does not actually raise taxes because for the last getting on to decade and a half, San Francisco has instituted a policy where we retire as much debt as we issue. All of this debt would not be issued at once. So the marginal incremental tax rate for real property would not go up. Are there any questions on Prop A?
Okay. Go ahead with Prop B.
Okay, why don't we move on to Proposition B? I call this the Clean Streets, Clean Government Charter Amendment. This has to go on the ballot because it amends our local constitution, the city charter, to do a couple of things. First, it would create a Department of Sanitation and Streets and take those duties out of the Department of Public Works, which Howard, you well remember, is a massive department with some 2,000 employees that does everything from the Bureau of Architecture to the Bureau of Engineering, many, many different functions, wherein sanitation and clean streets has never received the due that they deserve. But equally importantly, in the wake of the tragic revelations that even got more attention today of the corruption of Mohamed Nuru, puts a public commission over this department, which is one of the only functions in the government that heretofore has not had an independent oversight commission over it. And it comes together with the requirement for annual performance audits and cost and waste analysis for both the existing Department of Public Works as well as the new Department of Sanitation and Streets. It got on the ballot by a 7-4 vote. 6 votes were required with Supervisors Fewer, Mandelman, Stephanie, and Yee in the dissent. It requires a 50% plus 1 affirmative vote to pass. And I just came from the virtual kickoff a few minutes ago. Are there questions about Prop B?
Well, in many other cities in the world that are very clean cities, they have professional public works departments that do the job. Why can't we just hire good leadership managers in DPW?
So look, I mean, I've been around under a number of different heads of DPW, but I think what is profoundly important is, number one, that there be real independent citizen oversight in the form of a commission. Unlike other departments that have commissions where the public can actually go and participate, where a commission has to vote on contracts. The notion of putting a commission over this department that had no oversight, I think is fundamentally important. But in addition to that, our Department of Public Works, which does everything from the Bureau of Street Repair to the Bureau of Urban Forestry, and has had ever expanding missions under it, to take out and focus solely the concept of and the function of sanitation, I think will give the streets the due that they deserve that has been lacking. So that's my response to that, Howard.
Okay, Prop C.
Proposition C is one of a couple of similar propositions. This one is also a charter amendment, so it requires a 50% plus one affirmative vote to pass. That would allow non-citizens to serve on boards and commissions and advisory bodies that right now is not the law. This is part of a movement that has allowed non-citizen and immigrants and folks like my own staff, Sarah Souza, to serve on our local Democratic County Central Committee. And this was put on unanimously by the entire Board of Supervisors, and I commend it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Does that include commissions, or does it include citizens advisory committees, task? What's the range?
That's correct. It includes the entire range. Obviously, all of those different bodies require approval in most instances by the Board of Supervisors, and many of them have specific requirements as to qualifications, but this would allow non-citizens heretofore precluded to serve on boards, commissions, as well as advisory bodies like CACs.
Okay, great.
Prop D, you guys went over. The only thing that I would add is that it was put on the ballot unanimously by the board, and it too is a charter amendment and requires a 50% plus one affirmative vote to pass.
Okay.
Proposition E actually amends a kind of bizarre, antiquated city charter requirement that was put on several decades ago by the last Republican who served on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, who managed to get 5 of her colleagues to join her, Anne Marie Conroy, into putting a provision in the city charter that mandates that the San Francisco Police Department have a minimum police staffing level of 1,971 sworn officers. A number, by the way, that over the next 25 years to this date, San Francisco has never met. But we know in the modern world of optimizing police staffing that there are much better ways than having a relatively arbitrary fixed number in the charter to determine what appropriate police staffing levels are based on population size. The city actually commissioned an independent report that will be heard next month. But this would remove that minimum staffing requirement from the charter and require the police commission to consider the independent report that I just mentioned and make recommendations when approving the department's proposed budget and submitting it to the mayor and the Board of Supervisors.
So this would work well with the reallocation of police funding to more social type services.
That, as well as a whole host of other issues, including civilianization. I mean, there are many full sworn officers in the police department who are not doing police work. I mean, we have full sworn officers in the records room. We have full sworn officers that are doing IT work that we've constantly been trying to civilianize. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have less people doing the work, but you'll have less sworn officers, and the sworn officers that are there would be doing actual police work, investigations, and the like.
Okay, great.
Proposition F is near and dear to me, and I spent quite a long time negotiating it with my colleagues and many different aspects of the business community and the mayor's office and the San Francisco Labor Council. And it, as with all tax issues, is extremely complicated. San Francisco has a business tax scheme dating back to the days of that former radical mayor, Dianne Feinstein, that was for many decades the higher of a gross receipts or payroll tax. That tax was the subject of litigation both here and in Los Angeles some 20 years ago. And as a result of that litigation, for a period of almost a decade and a half, San Francisco actually jettisoned its gross receipts tax based on the total gross receipts that a San Francisco business generates in favor of a payroll tax. The general thinking in the world, in the complex world of taxation, is that payroll taxes have a downward incentive on job growth. In 2012, my predecessor, David Chu, came up with a hybrid gross receipts payroll tax. And this tax will do a number of things. Number one is it will actually, now that we have over a half a decade of gross receipts information, it will actually phase out the last of our payroll tax, and we will be a gross receipts only tax. But more importantly, in the era of COVID, this was designed to do a number of things: make the tax much more equitable, and it equalizes the information center, which many of us know as big tech, to match the rates of professional services. And this helps offset the change from payroll to gross receipts, as well as in the COVID area, give a range of different relief mechanisms for small businesses and cost-sensitive industries. It does that, one, by expanding the tax exemption to small businesses up to $2 million, which benefits some 3,100 small businesses. It reduces the annual registration for businesses with $1 million or less in gross receipts, and provides significant tax reductions for cost-sensitive industries that have been most impacted by the pandemic, including hotels, restaurants, retail, and manufacturing. And those reductions would expire in 2024. There's a whole host of additional things, the most important being that, as you'll recall, the voters of San Francisco, with over 60%, approved 2 Proposition Cs in different years on different ballots. This was all done in the wake of advice from the city attorney that tax measures that were put on the ballot by the voters, as compared to tax measures that, like this one, were put on the ballot by the legislators, would require a 50% plus 1 as compared to a 2/3. And I can explain all of this to you, but the bottom line is Big C, which was aimed at raising money to address homelessness, and Little C, or Baby C as we fondly call it, which was for early childhood education, have been the subject now of litigation. Since this ballot measure was written and put on the ballot, we have had one victory, namely the Big C litigation was upheld. It went all the way to the California State Supreme Court that refused to hear it and upheld the 2 lower courts that ruled in the city's favor. And that will unlock about $300 million that has been collected, which will help with the budget deficit that we have in the coming year and likely in the year after that. But it still has the mechanism for unlocking Baby C should the courts, which is still winding its way through the court system. So that is a high level synopsis of what Prop F does. It was put on the ballot by the entire Board of Supervisors and is endorsed by the mayor. And I'm happy to try to answer questions about that if you would like.
Doesn't
What-
the,
I have a
ahead,
question too.
Carol. Okay, Carol.
What do big C and little c have to do with F?
So there's a provision in Proposition F that says that should the city lose the litigation in Big C or Little C, that it would, upon their loss, kick in an additional tax that equals the size of the Big C and Little C taxes previously approved by the voters, but that was approved not by a 2/3 percentage, but by less than 2/3, but more than 50%. The Big C issue has been mooted by the fact that last week, the California State Supreme Court did not take up the appeal from the lower court brought by the Jarvis Gann folks and some of the largest interests downtown. So it still stands to unlock Little C, but the unlocking provisions of Proposition F that would have triggered a additional bump in the tax should the city lose are of much less importance than when this was originally written, Carol.
Thank you, Aaron.
Okay, why don't we move on to Prop G?
I'm still learning the letters, Howard.
You voting.
Yeah. So yes, this has been before the voters before. We are taking another shot at it. It would authorize youths ages 16 and 17 to vote in municipal elections. And one thing that really convinced me to vote for this, because I was very skeptical at first, is the fact that when people start voting at an early age, it reinforces voting behavior throughout their lives. This was the testimony on behalf of this from young people in San Francisco was had me change my mind. Ultimately, it was supported by the entire Board of Supervisors, and it requires a 50% plus one vote to pass.
Okay, great. Prop H is streamlining permitting.
Yeah.
Businesses.
So let me just say this about Prop H, which is obviously we are in a moment where the world as we know it has been turned upside down. And I think we're all figuring out ways to streamline various things that we have taken for granted and relied on for a long time. This is a very complicated 78 page piece of legislation that was put on the ballot directly by the mayor. So unlike what I do every week, hold public hearings, take public input, this was put on directly by the mayor. There are provisions in there that actually allow it to be amended by the board after a period of 3 years. Given what's happened during COVID-19, I don't think it's the end of the world, although quite frankly, I think it is something that really should have gone through a public process. That's where careful legislative work happens. But I don't think it's the end of the world. I just think it should have been done legislatively. That is why we vote for our legislators. So I have no particular recommendation on that. But it's also, I think, being used as a wedge in certain districts. But any steps that we take right now to permit uses that have been more difficult to permit in the past makes sense. So there you have it.
Is it 50% plus one?
That is correct.
Okay, great.
And that takes us to the real estate transfer tax.
Yes,
the real estate, right. Prop I is a real estate transfer tax. That is a tax that is paid one time and only one time upon the sale of a piece of real property in San Francisco. This was actually put on the ballot by 5 members of the board, pursuant to a provision of the charter led by Supervisor Preston. And it would amend our local tax code to increase the property transfer tax rate for very expensive properties that have a value of at least $10 million from 2.75% to 5.5%. Real estate transfer taxes are notoriously volatile, depending on what's happening in the economy. Currently, over a 10-year average, the city has gotten as little as $13 million in a year and as much as $300 million in a year from real estate transfer tax, with an average of about $196 million. It is very hard to predict what this tax would bring in. It obviously would only apply to really the largest downtown commercial office buildings, maybe a handful of large residential properties like the Golden Gateway and others. But the controller says it could bring in, on average, looking backwards, projecting that forwards, as much as an additional $200 million a year. And that requires a 50% plus one vote to pass.
It may dampen speculation. There have been high rises that have been flipped within a year of purchase. So you think that might be a good benefit?
Well, there is that, and there is also the fact that Donald Trump owns 1/3 of the Bank of America building, and it is currently on the market. So he would actually have to pay some of it if it passes.
Yep, that'd be good. Okay, Prop J, parcel tax for schools.
So Prop J, goes back to the same issue around the unlocking of Big C and Little C. The original Proposition G was put on by popular signature a couple of years ago to raise a parcel tax for teacher pay. And the same ruling that our city attorney, Dennis Herrera, made that said if it was put on by the voters and not by the school district or the board of supervisors, that it would require 50%. It too has been tied up in litigation. I think the school district is optimistic about that, given the ruling that we just got on Big C, which we didn't know we were going to get, and we didn't know when we were going to get. But this would actually repeal the parcel tax for educators that was passed in 2018, and replace it with another one. It requires a 2/3 vote. It is basically a way to start paying the teachers sooner. And it was put on the ballot directly by the mayor. It is a tax. It is a dedicated tax, and it requires 2/3 of the vote to pass.
Okay, very good. Let's go on.
Proposition K was put on through the legislative process by the Board of Supervisors, and it authorizes the city to, and this is interesting, to acquire, own, and develop and construct or rehabilitate affordable housing, which, believe it or not, is precluded under a 1950s era provision of the California Constitution at Article 34, which is the reason why most affordable housing properties are not actually owned by the city, but are owned by neighborhood-based nonprofits like the Chinatown Community Development Center or the Tenderloin Housing folks. So this would actually authorize not fund, just authorize the city's ability to do up to 10,000 units. It is aspirational as to how we would do that and how we would fund that. That is not addressed in this measure, but it is the first step.
And the 1950s state constitution measure is part of the types of redlining or racist legislation of the past.
That is absolutely correct, Howard. And the interesting thing is that it actually has a provision that says the local electorate can choose not to apply Article 34. So you actually have to take this step. Frankly, I think this should just be taken out of the California Constitution. It's nuts, and you're absolutely right. It comes from a racist land use history in the state of California.
Yep. Okay, Prop L, top executives who earn more than their staff, or a lot more than their staff.
Right. So this actually was pioneered in Portland, Oregon, and it would impose an additional gross receipts tax or an administrative tax on businesses that have a greater than 100-to-1 ratio of the compensation of the business's highest paid managerial employees to the median compensation paid to the business's employees that are based in San Francisco. And obviously there are easy ways to get around this. You can lower the CEO's pay or raise the median compensation of everybody and you won't be subject to the tax. So hopefully some of these businesses will stop giving their CEO $25 million a year and paying everybody else $100 or whatever $1,000 a year. The controller projects that this could raise $60 to $140 million, although results in any given year could vary. And it was submitted by unanimous vote of the entire Board of Supervisors, and the lead sponsor was Supervisor Haney, and it requires a 50% plus one affirmative vote to pass.
Unfortunately, there probably are many ways of getting around this. You know, the companies could move their headquarters out of the city. Executives could take more in stock options than pay. You know, it's kind of a somewhat risky measure, I think.
I'm not going to balance the city's budget off of it, I can tell you that.
Yeah. Okay, and then we have Measure RR, the Caltrain sales tax.
Yeah, this was exciting. This, as for folks who don't know, Caltrain is a regional railroad that goes all the way from Gilroy, California, 77 miles to 4th and King Street in San Francisco. And someday when we do the downtown extension, all the way to the new Transbay terminal that has been waiting for that train to come. In 1991, the three counties of Santa Clara, San Mateo, and San Francisco banded together and bought the right-of-way and rolling stock from Union Pacific Railroad. And the three counties have a joint powers agreement that has been in place and amended over the years. And that railroad pre-COVID moved about 65,000 people up and down the peninsula to San Francisco, decongesting Highway 101. It is currently in the process of being electrified with a $647 million grant from the United States of America, which is not only going to decrease particulate matter emissions from the railroad, but actually allow the frequency of the railroad and increase its capacity to as much as 3 times its current carrying rate of 65,000 people. Caltrain has never had an independent source of funding. A couple of years ago, State Senator Jerry Hill from San Mateo County sponsored and passed a state piece of legislation, Senate Bill 797, that allowed the 3 counties, with permission of each and every Board of Supervisors and each of their respective transit agencies, so the Valley Transportation Authority in Santa Clara County, SamTrans in San Mateo County, and the SFMTA Commission in San Francisco County, to put a 1/8 cent sales tax on the ballot. Raises about $100 million a year, or at least pre-COVID. We'll see what sales tax generates during the COVID period, but would give this railroad an independent source of operating money as well as capital money that it could bond against. We got off to a rocky start because Santa Clara County and San Francisco County wanted some changes to the joint powers agreement as it related to true shared governance between the 3 counties. San Mateo ultimately relented. We are now working very, very well together. There was a nice article about it in today's Chronicle. It is polling well in all 3 counties. And it is, I think, a great investment in the future of this region. And I totally commend Prop RR to all of you.
And if the Caltrain sales tax doesn't pass, it actually could threaten the existence of Caltrain. Is that true?
So let me say, I don't want to overstate this, Howard. There is no question that every transit property in urban America has been under incredible strain as ridership has plummeted. I mean, in the case of our own Muni organization, we've gone from about 750,000 people or rides a day to down to less than 100,000 at the beginning of the pandemic. And now crept up to about 150,000. So fare box recovery is down for every transit agency in America. What's interesting about Caltrain is Caltrain actually, unlike most every other transit agency, is heavily reliant on fare box recovery. About 70% of their money comes from fare box recovery. The other 30% is split between the 3 counties, which, to give you an idea, order of magnitude, is about $15 million a year out of the SFMTA's budget. So I don't know that it would come to a crashing halt. I know that that has been said, but certainly there would have to be massive reductions in service, not unlike the massive reductions in service that you've seen as San Francisco has eliminated for the time being some 50 different bus and light rail lines. But this certainly would be a long-term stable source of funding. And it would also allow counties like San Francisco not to have to pay that $15 million a year in, and we could use it for our own muni operations. And of course, who knows, Howard, what is going to happen in November. I am hopeful that we will win back the United States Senate and the White House and keep the House of Representatives, in which case perhaps transit agencies like the MTA and Caltrain may see more federal largesse during the COVID-19 period and beyond.
Okay. Any questions from the audience on any of the measures?
Yes.
Carol.
Regarding the sales tax increase, considering what an inequitable sales tax is there any chance that this would be mitigated by lowering any other part of the sales tax?
So you're asking a really good question, Carol. And let me just tell you, I struggled and all of my colleagues struggled with sales tax. The other taxes that we're talking about, parcel taxes, certainly gross receipts taxes, are not regressive. Sales tax are fundamentally and by definition a regressive tax because they overly tax the poorest people because that's how it works. Having said that, public transit is the great equalizer, and part of the deal, if you will, was that Caltrain had to agree to change their pricing structure to be much more equitable for low-income people in the same way that we have done that for low-income seniors who ride Muni for free, for youth who ride Muni for free. Part of this whole deal was that Caltrain had to agree to have a much more equitable pricing structure that allowed low-income people to access that regional piece of transportation. So that is how we dealt with it. But yes, there's no question it is a regressive tax.
More questions? No?
And I will also just add, Carol, that I wish Senator Hill had given the 3 counties other options, but that was the only option that we were given.
Okay.
Thank
Any
you.
last questions? No? Okay, thank you, Aaron. Who would you like to designate to speak on state?
So I am running downtown and I am going to turn this over to Lee Hepner, who probably knows more about the state ballot that I have not yet fully familiarized myself with other than Props 21 and 22, and he can regale you with all of that. And everybody stay healthy, and thank you, Karen, for putting that in the chat box. Take care, everybody.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron.
Bye for now.
Good evening. All right, Lee.
Hello, Howard. And just so I'm clear on time, how much time do I have to get through this list of?
Well,
positions?
unfortunately, the faster the better. But
No, that's actually fantastic for me. I prefer it.
all right.
And I can kind of glaze over the ones that are less significant and kind of emphasize those that I think are worth a little extra attention.
Okay.
It is a stacked state ballot. Let's just start with the top. Proposition 14 is a Stem Cell Research Institute bond. It is a $5.5 billion bond. It basically re-ups a $3 billion bond that was passed in 2004. If you recall, back in 2004, it wasn't too dissimilar in the sense that our federal government was disinvesting from science. And this was the effort back then to fill that gap and to make sure that stem cell research was taking place. Of course, there are big concerns about bond indebtedness right now. $5 billion is a lot of money statewide. It's not as much as it is locally, but $5 billion over, even I think it's 30 years is quite a bit of money. So that's Proposition 14. I'm going to move on quickly from that one and not really recommend one.
Let me ask you a quick question. Has the previous investments been successful? What's the track record?
Yeah, that's a good question, Howard. And by every measure, everything that I've read about this, there's just about unanimous accord that those previous investments were successful. The opposition on the current bond takes the flavor of wishing that there was more oversight to make sure that the bond proceeds and the bond expenditures actually facilitated benefits for a broader community. The response from the proponents of Prop 14, as far as I know, is that they have established a new oversight committee which focuses on equity issues to make sure that those new bond proceeds are allocated more effectively.
Okay. Prop 15, another
I think
tax measure.
Kathy Burke might have had a question, but
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's go to that. Who had a question?
I did. I just wondered, I don't want to go with 14. To me, it seems that was put in at a time when it was questionable whether stem cell research was going to receive, federal. I mean, it was when it was being contested. Stem cell research was being contested. I don't know why we should be doing a separate thing. I don't know. I'm wondering why we need to continue this.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people share that mentality. I mean, in every group discussion I've had about this, there's been a lot of hemming and hawing. Groups like Indivisible SF have issued no recommendation. I think it's the only race that the only measure that they've stayed out of. The League of Pissed Off Voters, which I also, affiliate with from time to time, have come out against it. Though I recall, in the research phase, we were for it, and then there was just a lot of back and forth. So, I think I wouldn't have a strong recommendation on this.
Okay. Prop 15.
Prop 15. This is the Communities and Communities and Schools First Act. I'm ashamed I don't know the formal name of it or the tagline, because this I think is one of the most important things on the ballot. This is split roll Prop 13 reform that people have been waiting for a long time for. Essentially what it does is it ends a tax loophole which allows corporations to avoid property tax increases by dividing ownership of a property, and it ends corporations' massive tax breaks under 1978's Prop 13. When people talk about Prop 13 reform, I think the third rail tends to be that we don't want to touch property taxes for single-family homeowners or people who are just trying to get by in their residences. That argument tends to fall apart for large corporations. So the way that Prop 13 works is your property tax is reset at the time of transference. This reform for commercial properties only would reassess the value of your property and jack up your property tax without that transference. The proceeds of it would go a long way to funding our beleaguered public school system, and I feel strongly that folks should support it.
Yeah, public schools and community colleges.
And community colleges, yes.
Yeah, I think many have argued over the decades that our education system in California has been diminished in large role to the Proposition 13 uh, decreasing of commercial property taxes. So that's the way it's titled, actually. The title of the measure is Increasing Funding for Public Schools and Community Colleges.
Right.
Okay, any questions? No. Okay, let's go on to Prop 16.
And schools and communities first is the way that is colloquially referred to. So that was
Right.
what I was trying to think of earlier.
Right.
Prop 16 is a repeal of Proposition 209, which would restore affirmative action in California, which was banned in California back in 1996. That ban on affirmative action back in 1996, I think, was largely motivated by a Republican-controlled state and was a fraught and, in hindsight, a regrettable error, which has prevented us from doing myriad things to advance preference based on race and sex and sexual orientation. So this is an appeal of affirmative action. It is, I think, supported by most people under the sun. I'm not aware what the opposition is, and most folks that I'm talking to are supporting it outright.
The argument against it is that some people would be discriminated by being too, having higher acceptance rates. Some Asian groups have opposed it because they feel they would lose slots because they have such a high percentage of acceptance in the UC system. But the biggest affirmative action in reality isn't for the disenfranchised and poor, it's for the rich. The rich have always had huge advantages in paying for, like Donald Trump or Jared Kushner, large donations to Ivy League schools, get their people into their programs easily, or athletes who have no academic accomplishment get certain slots, or people who pay for others to take their SAT tests, or others who fake resumes of certain accomplishment. So the wealthy have always had affirmative action in large numbers. So to have some equal opportunities for lower income and the people with less opportunity seems like just a small balance of that inequity.
The problem with it has been, though, that some places have not really done it very well. And what they've had is, particularly in like commercial things, that they would call a company, a black company or something, and they said somebody, and it wasn't really at all. And that, it's got to really be, I have friends who are both for it and against it because of that. It's been terribly managed so that the rich whites got more still because they could pretend that they were a minority company.
That's super interesting. I hadn't heard that. I agree with a lot of what Howard was saying. If there aren't any other questions, I think we can probably move on to the next one.
Yes, Prop 17. Right to vote.
Prop 17 restores the right to vote for persons on parole. This is one of a couple measures on the state ballot to expand the franchise. Currently, people with felonies are disqualified from voting until both their prison term and their parole are completed. Prop 17 would allow people with felonies who are on parole to vote, but those who are still in prison would still not be able to vote. Just a little data point, there are 40,000 people currently on parole in California, 26% of whom are Black, 40% are Hispanic, and 26% are white. So, I mean, there's certainly a disproportionate effect on people of color. I think that this is a very sensible expansion of the franchise. Groups like NorCal or the ACLU Californians United for a Responsible Budget, League of Women Voters, Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, People Over Profit, San Diego. It's a laundry list of groups, Indivisible, SF, a lot of public advocacy groups are supporting this.
Okay. Any questions? All right. Prop 18, allowing 17-year-olds to vote.
Yeah, so it's not exactly all 17-year-olds, but what this would do, and I think it's actually kind of clever, is it would allow 17-year-olds to vote in a primary or a special election if they would be 18 for the next general election. Indivisible SF calls it a logical measure that encourages young people to participate in their democracy. It's not unlike the argument for our own local Vote 16. It is supported by, California YMCA, League of Women Voters, Secretary of State Alex Padilla, the opposition, as far as I can tell, is a group called the California Election Integrity Project, which is a right-wing group that has done presentations for the Tea Party and advances a very kind of right-wing slant. I think it's a pretty safe measure to vote yes for, and it's narrowly tailored.
Okay. Prop 19 changes certain property tax rules.
Yeah, I'm hoping that somebody on the call can help me with this one. This is a little complex. Essentially, if this measure passes, California would allow people to transfer their tax assessment to more expensive homes and increase the number of times people over 55 or with severe disabilities can do so. It's the notion of portability, where you can take your current property tax rate to your next property tax, and you can do that 3 times over in this measure. It is supported by the California Realtors. I think it is intended to provide more liquidity to the market, more exchanges, more property exchange, essentially. It does establish a fund, and it is expected to raise revenues, and it establishes a fund that would go into wildfire relief, which I believe is how it has the support of firefighter groups. I have talked to a lot of people who feel very strongly that it is a very sensible reform. I tend to, and this is my bias showing, stub my nose at things that are supported by the California Association of Realtors. But in this instance, I think it is, on the one hand, a sensible reform. On the other hand, I think people tend to be concerned that lower income, smaller counties are going to lose a lot of tax revenue when people carry their property tax rates out of more expensive jurisdictions into lower cost jurisdictions. I don't know if there are any specific questions about this. There seem to be a lot of pros and a lot of cons on this one. And I'm not certain that I have my own mind made up about it.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have any insights into Prop 19? No? Seems to have
I have a question. Hello.
Yeah. Carol.
Thank you.
Carol.
Is this strictly single-family residence, or is it also commercially owned commercial properties that have an owner in residence, or do you know where the lines are drawn on this?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I do know. I mean, I know that it's not for commercial properties. It is for homeowners, but I think part of your question is, what if the home is in a mixed unit or a mixed use building with commercial on the ground floor, for instance? I'm not sure I know the answer to that question. Yeah.
Thanks, Lee.
Yeah, it seems to apply to people over the age of 55, and it allows the transfer of a primary residence tax base to another property. And that's why people in wildfires are supporting it, because if you lose your home and you buy another home, you can transfer the assessment value, I suppose, to the new home.
Right. And it,
the original one was only once you could do it. And for some people, that doesn't make much sense. So they've increased it to 3 times that you can do it. Like if you're 55 and you move from one place to another place, you can do that tax thing 3 times. At this time, it's once in a lifetime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think we'll all have to read up a little bit more on this one, although it seems pretty good, but I'm not totally sure either.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll read up on that one. Sorry, I don't have more of a opinion on that. Prop 20. This is a measure supported and authored by law enforcement groups. It would amend several criminal sentencing reforms passed to reduce incarceration for nonviolent felonies. It would add certain crimes to the list of felonies for which early parole is restricted. It turns certain misdemeanors into felonies. It requires DNA collection for certain misdemeanors. It is the kind of antithesis of the much talked about Prop 47, which made a lot of these crimes quote unquote wobblers, so that in the sentencing process you could decide whether to treat them as misdemeanors or felonies, and many instances that has reduced incarceration across the state. So this is kind of a pro-law enforcement rollback of criminal justice reforms recently. It was put on the ballot by a group called Keep California Safe, which spent $2 million gathering signatures in 2018 to get it on the ballot this year. It is supported with a lot of police union money. At one point, Jerry Brown challenged the initiative signature threshold, saying that it's technically a constitutional amendment since it interferes with constitutional changes. So Jerry Brown tried to intervene to say that it needed a much higher signature threshold in order to try to prevent this one from getting to the ballot. Most civil rights groups, including the ACLU, are firmly against this, and most folks that I've talked to are against it as well.
Okay, that's good. All right, Proposition 21 expands.
I'm going to turn on my light.
Okay.
Because it suddenly got dark. Prop 21, if folks remember Prop 10 from 2018, this is kind of Prop 10 Redux. It is another measure put on the ballot largely by Michael Weinstein and the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, who are the primary sponsors of Prop 10, and again, are at it with Prop 21. If this measure passes, local governments would be allowed to enact a rent control on residences that were first occupied over 15 years ago. So whereas Prop 10 proposed to eliminate Costa-Hawkins and allow local jurisdictions to expand rent control, this one is a little bit more tempered approach, which allows for rent control to be imposed on buildings that are 15 years old, irrespective of when they were built. Right now, we are prohibited from imposing rent control on buildings that were first occupied after 1995. I am a big rent control advocate. I was raised that way. I think San Francisco is a rent control town. Prop 10 was a really thorny battle. And I believe San Francisco was the only county in the state that approved of Prop 10, which ultimately failed statewide. So Prop 21 is a little more narrowly tailored effort to expand rent control, to amend the Costa-Hawkins Act. I think it's tremendous. I've got a lot of folks who are working on it. One of the criticisms of Prop 10 in 2018 was that the AIDS Healthcare Foundation had kind of done this on their own without much consultation with tenants' rights groups across the state. As much as I've had conversations with the tenants union in Los Angeles and friends who work at the statewide advocacy group Tenants Together, they've assured me that this has been a much more collaborative group effort, and are optimistic that with the slightly more tailored approach and with a broader base of support, that this one might actually be able to pass this year. I support it. I think it's a logical incremental measure that prevents the diminishment of rent control and even expands it.
And there's a huge amount of money being put against this measure, and very little. So it's going to be a tough race.
Yeah, and The same as in 2018, it's just a torrent of money pouring in against this. And the very cynical part of it is that the groups who are opposing this have called themselves things like Californians for Affordable Housing, which is just extremely deceptive. I would say it's the most cynical thing on the state ballot, but we're about to get to Prop 22.
Yeah, and they're using immigrants to oppose it. You know, that's the story that hurts the Asians, for instance.
Right. I think if you can't win on the merits of your proposal and you need to resort to deception, maybe you're in the wrong.
Yeah. So. Hopefully there'll be some money put in the support campaign.
Right,
so
and
anyway,
that's yeah. That's where AHF comes in. I think they put a healthy $6 million plus into this, and maybe more's on the way.
Huh, okay. Any questions from the audience on this? Okay, Prop 22. App-based Uber and Lyft measure, I guess would be the good term.
Right. So if folks recall, last year, Assembly Bill 5 was passed in the state of California. A San Diego Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez authored and put AB 5 on the ballot. And what that effectively did was codified a California Supreme Court decision called the Dynamex decision, which put forth a test to determine when a worker is an employee, with which comes various rights and benefits and healthcare, sick pay, paid leave, the things that people who have been full-time workers, or been union members love and enjoy. Or on the other hand, whether they're independent contractors who are not afforded those benefits. The big talking point about this was that it essentially overnight proposed to recategorize Uber and Lyft drivers as employees. Same for gig workers who work for Postmates and DoorDash and, you name it, Grubhub, Caviar. It essentially categorizes them as employees. So in I think probably the most cynical thing on the ballot, Uber, Lyft, Postmates, and DoorDash have ponied up $110 million so far, which I think makes this the most expensive ballot measure in California history, to carve out their drivers and their gig workers from the protections afforded to those workers by AB 5. They're running a campaign that this provides more flexibility to people who want to, work the true 1099 lifestyle and be gig workers. But I think, as we've seen, a lot of these drivers are working 12-hour days, 5 days a week. And I think the retort to the flexibility argument is that flexibility is a livable wage. Flexibility is having healthcare and paid sick leave so that you can stay home when you're sick. So I'm firmly in the no on 22 column, as are most labor organizations across the state. It's just, we'll see what happens with this one, because it's just a lot of money, again, put into kind of a deceptive campaign.
And Uber and Lyft in previous lawsuits have filed documents that indicate that their business model is to drive taxis out of business, to drive public transit out of business. And part of the way that they can do that is by paying people very little. And they want to drive those drivers out of business in the future by going into the development of autonomous cars. So their motive is to destroy all competition, corner the market, and then raise the rate of mobility in the future. And then, of course, we all know they lose billions of dollars a year currently and are supported solely by venture capitalists looking far into the future when they create this monopoly of mobility. So this is another one of these very cynical measures that is not in the interest of anyone who works, who makes a decent salary, who belongs to a labor union. So anyway.
Yeah,
that's very
I think
good.
we're going to start a podcast. I love this back and forth. This is great.
Yeah, you should do a regular program, Lee.
Shall we move on?
Yeah, and our last one, Prop 23 is another initiative measure.
There are
Which is,
actually two more after that, unfortunately.
oh, are there? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it goes
I'm
up to
missing
25,
something.
but let's move
Okay.
through them quickly, because
All
I think
right.
we got.
Okay. Oh, yes, that's right. Okay, go ahead.
So Prop 23, this is dialysis clinic reform. It would require dialysis clinics to have an on-site physician while patients are being treated. It would require them to report data on dialysis-related infections. It would require them to obtain consent from the state health department before closing a dialysis clinic, and requires them to not discriminate against patients based on the source of payment for care. I think that this is a very sensible one. It is strongly supported by nurses and other labor groups. I don't have much else to say about it beyond that. This seems like a good, safe regulation for dialysis clinics.
Okay. Prop 24.
Prop 24, this one is tricky. It is a consumer personal information law and agency initiative. It is being billed as privacy reform. I, from time to time, think of myself as somewhat of a privacy enthusiast, and yet I think that I have some major problems with this one. I think under the guise of expanding 2018's California Consumer Privacy Act, which allows consumers to request that a business disclose what information it has gathered about them. It requires, this is the CCPA. It requires companies to delete information that they have gathered about you if you submit a request, and prevent businesses from selling personal information to third parties. This is one that, under the guise of expanding those protections, actually creates some unfortunate loopholes for big tech, for credit agencies. It has made the people who should support this, groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation and ACL NorCal, come out in opposition to it. And I think when the core advocates on privacy issues are opposing privacy reform, it should raise an eyebrow or two. I understand that you know the detail, the devil is really in the details with this one. It was put on the ballot by a single individual, by and large, and without the buy-in or collaboration with people who really spend a lot of time building coalitions to work around privacy issues. And I think that that's why it hasn't earned the support of a broader coalition of privacy advocates. I'm not supporting it. I know a lot of other folks who are not supporting it. I know a couple of folks who are kind of throwing their arms up and supporting it. I think that this is one where people need to be kind of educated about the pitfalls, particularly those big loopholes for big tech and credit agencies. It would be a shame to take one step back, or one step forward, two steps back.
Yeah, that's good information. Okay, Prop 25, replacing cash bail with risk assessment.
Yeah, so this is another one that is interesting. So this is basically State Senate Bill 10 was a bill passed in 2018, and Prop 25 is a referendum on SB 10. SB 10 replaced cash bail with risk assessments. So, you know, California, until SB 10 goes into effect, California has used and will continue to use a cash bail system where people who are arrested can pay a cash bond as collateral that they then return for trial. SB 10 gets rid of that and replaces it with a risk assessment system where essentially courts and judges are performing an assessment about whether people need to be retained. This one is a little funky because I think while most civil rights groups would love to see an end to cash bail and exactly what this does, which is a risk assessment model. This is it actually undermines San Francisco's more extensive reform. So this is kind of one that would be great for the state of California at large, but would roll back our own local protections, many of which are trying to even go one step further and reduce and eliminate some of the bias and discretion that judges exert in the bail or in the system when you're deciding whether to detain people or to let them go free until it's time for trial. So, it's good for the state. It is actually a restriction on the more progressive criminal justice reform that San Francisco has adopted. I think our own district attorney has remained silent on it. I don't believe our public defender has taken a position on it either. I believe that the League of Pissed Off Voters actually, while we were discussing all of this, initially said, hell yes, that is awesome. And then was like, wait a minute, no, as we started to hear from people in the criminal justice reform world who pointed out that it actually has rolls back some of the protections in San Francisco.
Okay. Any questions on any of the measures? Yes, please, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is about Proposition 22. Who employs the taxi drivers? Are they employees of some company? And with that, do they get benefits from that company that employs them to drive a taxi cab?
I believe that is true. I do believe, I wish Supervisor Peskin was here because he's neck deep in all of this on the local level right now, but I do believe that taxi cab drivers drive for a color scheme. The color schemes own a certain amount of medallions that they essentially have purchased from, or that are on loan from the city, or that they purchased from the city. There are multiple different ownership models, and taxi cab drivers receive benefits through the color schemes that employ them. I believe is how that.
You're sure of that, or you think, or you're guessing that
they are employees.
What?
People who own the what do they call it? You mentioned what you called it.
Medallion.
Medallion. What this thing has done with Lyft and this other is it has totally destroyed the value of medallions.
Well, certainly yes, because the medallions and the taxi cab drivers prior to Uber and Lyft ran vehicles that were dirty, that were not operating responsibly and properly, and gave us horrible service at very high prices. We're an embarrassment to the physical community of San Francisco. That's what opened the door for Uber and Lyft, because the cab service business, which anyone would agree with. We live in North Beach in San Francisco. We couldn't get a cab to Grant and Green Street. They'd say, go down to Columbus Street and hail one yourself. We don't come into that neighborhood. And there was no other alternative. So they got the deal brought on by their complacency of being a good valued company. So then Uber and Lyft come along and they say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to give free enterprise to this.
All right. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any other questions before Lee has to depart? Any questions on any other measure? Okay, if not, all right. Well, thank you very much, Lee. You did a great job.
Thank you for bearing with me.
Very informative. Okay, thank you, Lee. Have a great
All
evening.
right.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.
Okay, bye. Karen, do we have a Star Child or anyone from the Libertarian Party available?
I do not see Star Child. I don't know.
Star Child, are you there by any chance? Or anyone from the Libertarian Party? Okay, no. All right. Well, anyway, that completes our event then. I'll be trying to gather more information on pros and cons and send that to you, everyone, by email who has attended these meetings. Also, the video of all our presentations from today and from the last two will be available, and I will be sending those around. So you can also forward that information to your friends and other voters or voter groups so they'll have the opportunity to see some of the candidates. As you can see, we have a huge number of candidates who are really quite qualified. And the District Democratic Club will be having an endorsement meeting on October 1st, where people who are eligible will be able to vote on our endorsements. I will be also convening an endorsement committee of some of our most active members and people who have been with the club and attended meetings for many, many years. So if you'd like to be on that endorsement committee, let me know. But I'll certainly reach out to some of our regulars. And with that, anybody have any other further comments before we adjourn?
I would just like to ask on this 25. I got a problem. I hit the wrong button and I got off the screen for a while. Anyway, what I'm wondering is, he says it's not supported by the more anti-bail groups, but have we accomplished that, or do we still have those heavy bail things in San Francisco? And I mean, in California. In other words, this money bail thing, I initially thought I would support it because at least it's a move toward the right direction.
Well, I think San Francisco has made great strides in, curbing, if not eliminating, cash bail. Our new district attorney, Chesa Bodine, ran on that measure because bail, as you know, is difficult for low-income people to pay. So our jails are filled with low-income
If you're rich, you don't go to jail. If you're poor, you do.
Right.
I mean,
so if you're wealthy and you commit a heinous crime, you can go out on bail by paying $1 million or $2 million bail. A person who sells a little weed or sells a little drugs, he can't.
That's what I mean. But I don't know that has been changed in all of California yet.
Not in California, but San Francisco certainly has had, great.
But this is a California-wide thing.
Yeah, and that's what Lee was saying, that it will certainly be beneficial for the state, but it may actually dampen San Francisco's already enacted reforms. So any other comments? Okay, well, that was quite an evening as I had hoped. I always hoped that we would do this quickly, but in actuality, one could spend 2 or 3 hours debating any of these issues. So thank you everyone for being so patient, and thank you Karen Scarr for your great work on our coordinating, helping to make our meeting successful, and to everyone else who has
Thank
contributed.
you, Howard, for doing all this.
Thank you very much, Katie. We appreciate you very much too.
Right.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Howard.
Okay.
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
Karen. Thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone.